Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for and by podcasters. We interview podcasters for the real scoop on podcasting. Whether you're thinking about starting a podcast or have been podcasting for years, you'll find lots of inspiration, valuable lessons, and tips in our interviews. This podcast is brought to you by Podbean. Please visit podbean.com, the home for podcasters.
Hi, I'm Toph. I am the creator and host of the GravityBeard podcast. And greetings to everybody at the Shanghai Podfest. I'm joined here with my co-host, Adam. Adam, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
And I'm also joined by Keith Galla, the host and creator of the Pop-Up Filmcast. How are you?
Hello, sir.
And Phil Kirshner, who was the creator and host of My Thing Could Be Your Thing.
Hello.
And we're doing this for Shannon Martin of Podbean. Podbean is the service that hosts in, what would you say? That is the...
I'd say hosts.
That's the platform that hosts our podcast. And just briefly about them, they are great. We've had a great experience. We've been on them since we started podcasting 3.5 years ago. The customer service is incredible. They're incredibly responsive. There was one example that I won't get into detail about, but I'd reached out to them and made a very specific suggestion about their website. They not only took it in, but they implemented my idea, I think, by the end of the day or the next day.
Wow.
So, and they're constantly upgrading and changing things, adding new features and services, and so Podbean's been great.
And they always pay us quickly when we do commercials like these.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
So thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Podbean, for being such a great host, but also thank you, Shannon, for asking us to participate in the Shanghai Podfest with these questions. So what we're doing here, guys, is we are discussing engagement, community engagement. They wanted us to talk about the GravityBeard interns and how that's a really good example of an audience engaging with the host, with the creator of the group and a podcast. So let's just jump right into the questions. We've already done number one. That was introduce yourself and the podcast briefly. I guess regarding the podcast, the GravityBeard podcast is always, since its inception, is a variety show podcast. Whenever you tune in from week to week, we do have elements of the show that are consistent and have been since we started it, but it has evolved since we started it. But it's a variety show in that you don't know necessarily what we're going to do from week to week. We've done a huge array of things, from interviews to roundtable discussions to a lot of different things under the comedy umbrella. And then currently we did This Week Today, which is something we've done consistently for last year and a half or so. And then more recently, we've done staff meetings, which is really a talk show, segmented, formatted show that we put together because we're getting so much great content out of the GravityBeard interns Facebook group. So that's essentially what the podcast is. Regarding the community itself, explain a little bit about the community, the GravityBeard interns. And actually, I'm going to turn to you, Keith.
Okay.
How would you describe or explain the community? And let me just qualify that. The reason I'm going to you is because I had a certain idea behind the group, but then you got involved very early, and I think you're a big part of how it evolved so quickly into what it is today.
The Intern Group is, especially the GravityBeard one, is a place that's kind of built its own like separate world, I guess, to some extent, in the way that it's not just people sharing content that they find online, and it's not people just interacting with the show in general, but like it's people that have taken up like an active part of the fictitious world that the GravityBeard is kind of put behind it, as far as like an internship, and suddenly the GravityBeard is a company, and everyone kind of bought into this, like it's an extra layer as opposed to like other groups where it's like people come on, they talk about the show, and they maybe try to interact with the host. This one actually built like its own separate thing all around it that allowed for more back and forth and interactivity with everyone. Yeah.
So really quickly, it wasn't just a Facebook group. It turned into kind of a universe of sorts, where it's got kind of its own lore and fabric and all those things. And really quickly, people gave themselves. So essentially what you're explaining is everybody in the group is kind of pretending that they're interns for a company that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so people are giving each other's titles and taking on roles, and we've got a campus that doesn't actually exist that we keep expanding and adding different elements to.
That's right.
And so yeah, it's not just a group of people in a Facebook group engaging with the creators of a podcast. There's kind of been a universe that's been created, and everybody's having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and so it makes it a little bit more of a, I think, like a unique interactive experience.
Yeah.
Because people have actually said, like, they've taken like their specific role and actually kind of made sure that their interaction is kind of focusing in on a certain aspect. Whether it be the cafeteria or the library or people are allowed to put whatever information they want, and then there's hashtags to follow along. But then you have the certain members who tend to post certain things a little bit more than others, and so everybody's found their own little niche within the activity of interacting. I don't think you see that in a lot of other groups.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
I think what that does is it enables the group to interact in a very specific way, so that it's not just a catch-all for stuff you find online or just discussion.
Because there's a lot of groups like that.
Yeah, and those are great.
Fun. Yeah.
But when you have that here, it's like, oh, hey, you're the sports turn. I'm going to send something sports related to this, and then we're going to discuss this in this world. And like, like the food aspect that you just mentioned, like the cafeteria. So everybody kind of has like by finding something you find interesting that relates to somebody else, then you have engaged that person in a conversation specifically to them. And then when somebody says that same thing to you, now you want to engage because they thought of you in this aspect. So I think it kind of makes a focused interaction more than just like a general catch-all for internet stuff.
Well, there's a framework to work within. Right.
And most other ones, when a new member comes in, it's like, hey, welcome our new member. And it's, either, show them a GIF or just say hello or welcome and stuff.
Right.
I mean, like, there's a whole, like, rundown now of,
it's a gamut.
please make sure you talk to me to get to talk to HR and get your, all this stuff. Please stop by the local store and get your, your food card for the cafeteria and all these other things that are there that you don't see other places. Like, it's a whole like lore that's been built around it.
Yeah, when someone joins the group, we treat them like it's a new employee going through the onboarding process,
and it's an easy way to bring them into the engagement. Like hey, welcome to our group. We're bringing you in. You can choose how you want to interact.
The great thing about that is, though, we don't really explain it. Like, they might be completely confused about all of that stuff.
But it keeps working. It keeps working.
That's true. Shannon asks how many members, stats, things like that.
A million? No.
I think we're over 1 million.
Over
now.
1 million?
No.
Yeah.
No, we've got about plus or minus 230 people in the group. And it's held. There was a period a few months ago where it grew a little more, grew a little faster, but we've kind of flattened out right there. But there was always 180, 90 something, and then it grew into the 200, early 200s, and so that's where it is at the moment. So, but and then
at that point, Chris got everyone in his improv group in, and then it leveled up.
I did do that because I got involved in improv
Sank the ship.
Locally, and then and then a lot of them joined in and whatnot. So that's how big the group is, and there's probably, it's hard to gauge because it changes. But Keith, how many people would you say are active? Like for 20 or 30, 40?
Probably at least 40 that are
20%?
on a constant regular.
Yeah.
There's probably 30 that are on a very constant. Another 10 that will chime in based on their availability.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is very random, or just they're like just looking in.
So a few more things just behind the numbers. At its peak, now it's dropped off here lately, but still a really big number. But at its peak, so Facebook doesn't give you a lot of metrics for a group this small. It gives you it gives you a total number for responses, which is like likes and whatever, and then comments and then posts. It gives you a total number of those three things. And at its peak, we were at 23,000 every 28 days. So that number was, what that breaks down to is just under, it was like 1 minute and 51 seconds. Someone was interacting with the group every 1 minute and 51 seconds. Now it's dropped down. So now it's probably like someone's interacting with the group every 5 or 6 minutes for 24 hours a day over a 28-day period. So the group gets a lot of steady, like knowing that it's only 20 or 30 or 40 people, that's a small group of people that are interacting a ton in a lot of different ways. Shannon also asked, why did you start the group? I won't go into the whole backstory because we've covered that on the show a number of different times, but I wasn't going to do a Facebook group. I didn't want to because I couldn't keep up with it. The show was enough work as it is. But Chris Brayton, who at the time was hosting a show called the More Good Than podcast, I was out at his house and he said, hey, you need to start a Facebook group for your show. And I immediately dismissed him. And then
as most people do.
and then that was in late April, and like 3 weeks later or something, I was at my desk at work, not wanting to work, and I impulsively started the group. And there was a bit on the show a long time ago where I made up a narrative that I was doing at the very end of each episode before the credits. I was doing this fake narrative where I was looking for an intern for the show and all the problems I was having, and that went for several episodes. And so because of that, Chris said, hey, you should call the group the GravityBeard Interns. So starting the group and the name of it was actually Chris's idea. And like I said, so there's two critical things I want to share about this. One is there's kind of there was a hesitation. I wanted the group to grow organically, but then I didn't think it would actually do that. And so I hesitated at first, but then what I decided to do is just go through my friend group on Facebook and invite as many people as I thought that had a certain criteria. And the criteria was basically people that had the same kind of sense of humor and sensitivity that I did to those things. People that were pretty laid back. They weren't super uptight. They wouldn't get upset over trivial things. Just a pretty chill group of people. And I went through my Facebook group and I came up with like 170 or 180 people or something. And I put them all in there, which basically just means that you send out invitations. Facebook, I think, has changed now, but I just invited all those people, and I just figured, if they're annoyed or they don't want to be in the group, like with a click of a button, they can leave the group. So it wasn't that much of an inconvenience, and that's how I populated the group. So it was but what was interesting though is that it was all of these people that I've known all of my life that I was connected with on Facebook from all different parts of my life, whether it be childhood and school times or college friends or work friends or podcast friends, or no matter where I knew them from, it was all these people from all these different places and times in my life all mixed together. And the only thought that I had behind the group was I want to do this social experiment and just throw all these people in the same stew. And like based on my criteria, if they all have this in common, how all these people that don't know each other, how are they going to mix? And so that's what I did. That's what the idea was. And then in the beginning, I just seeded it with just some basic information, just some interesting news stories or some different things we talked about on the show or whatever. And then Keith joined really early on. And then I think you were a big part of how it kind of turned this corner and became this world that we very quickly started to build. But it started as kind of a social stew, an experiment that I was running on Facebook. And that's where it came from. And that's why I started it. The next question was, why did you think it would be an important part or extension of the podcast? Well, I just answered that. I didn't. I wasn't going to do it. I had no use for any more social media than what I already had, which I was wrong. It actually worked. Any challenges? I don't know. What would you say are some challenges? Do you know of any? Yeah, time for sure.
Time.
Yeah.
There's so much there, and there's so much potential there that you just can't. There's not enough time to act on all of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Keith, do you identify any challenges with it?
I think recently, like you guys had noticed that a handful of people hadn't been chiming in as much, and
yeah,
I mean, you can't control other people's schedules and their lives and what's going on, and something like, oh well, there's a lot of people that was like, we miss you guys, we enjoyed your interacting. If you guys get time, please come back and be. And it was, it wasn't like them posting stuff, but like also comments missing from people, and so I think that's the one thing is just, and it is with like anything you do is like, okay, you get the hype and it's rolling along, and then how do you maintain that level of interaction with people and get people to continue on, because people's lives change, they have to do other stuff,
they just get busy, they just have lives. That reminds me of two other things that I want to talk about regarding just the culture of the group. So the other thing, we don't really have rules in the group per se. There's kind of an unspoken rule that this group is kind of an escape for people. And so we've just all agreed that we're not going to talk about serious things going on out in the real world. So no politics, no religion, nothing polarizing that's in the news, nothing like that at all.
Polarizing things, just not in the news.
Thank you. But you understand what I'm saying. So, and all of us are grown adults, and we recognize that all of those things that are going on out in the real world are very serious, and we take them seriously. But we also know that just to be a healthy person emotionally, that you do need a place to go where you can escape a little bit. Yeah. And so for that reason, everybody just kind of has an understanding. It's an unspoken rule that we we don't talk about any of that stuff. And I have, deleted just a very small handful of posts. If someone makes a political comment or something that I think is going to head in that direction, I just delete it real quick. And that hasn't happened a lot, but I've done it just to try to maintain that. And I think everyone likes and appreciates that being true in the group.
It's had a positive, I think, net gain.
Yeah.
Just in the general.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, because, and I think you said it best. You can find any of that stuff anywhere you want to on the pod, like anywhere on the internet.
Yeah, what I've said before is you can literally discuss or find that anywhere else out in the world. We're just not going to do it here.
Right.
And so that, and also to your point of we've reached out to people recently and said, just, hey, where you been? We do, even though we're joking, we're pretending to be interns at a company and all that kind of stuff. We also have become a group of friends where we genuinely care about each other. And so we're friends. So if there is something going on with whoever, a lot of times we'll know that. And so we do treat each other kind of in that way. There is kind of, I think that's part of the culture of the group.
100% agree.
I think he said it best. I mean, if your biggest challenge is that you don't get to hear from your friends enough, that's a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, and there have been more than a couple of people more than once have told me in some, either this exact way or some in similar way, have told me this is their favorite place on the internet.
Yeah.
They've told me that, which you can imagine how that makes me feel. I feel incredible that we've created a place that's how they want to express how they feel about what we've created.
Right.
That's incredibly gratifying as the person behind it. Because I feel the same way. I need this. I need it. I need this group of people, and I need this environment at certain times.
I will say one other separate challenge that I run into, because I do interact in there as much as I do, is my non-GravityBeard feed of Facebook sometimes does not exist.
Right.
And and so every now and then I'll see something from somebody who I used to see a lot of posts before. I'm like, oh yeah, the algorithm is really kicking in on the group that I'm in, and how much is interacting there, and then I don't hear as much. Is also a reason why I do get friend requests from people in the group. Yeah, and I won't add them because I'm already seeing a lot of stuff from them in the GravityBeard group.
Well, that's an interesting decision that I've had to make. Is I've all but ignored my personal feed. But I've started posting personal things about my family and children and things in the group, because it does. There's not a lot of that, but it is personal. We are acting like real people towards each other. So I mean, I'll post adorable or hilarious things about my kids or whatever, and
adorable is subjective.
Wow. In any case, So people are welcome to do that. We've said, hey, post funny pictures or videos of your children, and they've done that, and that's fun. So there is that personal element too. Best part or benefit? I think we kind of rolled that answer into what we just said. So
well, you basically create a whole nother version of the show as well.
Yeah. So I won't tell that whole story either, but the success of the Facebook group turned our podcast on its head, whereas it was supposed to be a very supplemental thing or kind of an end around to engage people in the show. And instead it turned into its own thing. And now we do the longest episodes by far that we do on our feed. Our stuff is the episodes about our staff meetings about what goes on in the group. So didn't expect that at all. Really enjoying that part of it, but it's turned everything upside down.
Yeah, I do have one challenge, and we don't have to expound on this very much, but the real challenge that I find is when people don't vote the way I want them to in our polls. Because that's ridiculous. All right, moving on.
We're actually going to get to that. We'll get to that briefly. The next question is, have you seen positive impacts on the podcast specifically or related projects, and can you share them? We just kind of touched on that. It totally turned the podcast upside down, and the show very much at times is about the podcast group, with our episodes, the staff meetings, but also creativity begets other creativity. So as we've enjoyed the GravityBeard Interns universe, we've toyed around with. We haven't launched any of these things, but we've toyed around with related projects. We've got the GBI superhero universe that we've thought about growing. We did GBI Files, which is kind of on, is out there to be worked on, and other things like that. We just are recently talking about experimenting or rolling out something in an RPG, a tabletop RPG format. So there's definitely been other things that it's inspired and impacted the show. For sure. And sure, now that we've got a group where people are engaged and responsive, even our other episodes that aren't related to everything going on in the group, we're getting more response and more engagement on that stuff. So it certainly has impacted that as well.
For sure.
Okay, now we'll get around to what you just inferred or referenced. What are some fun things you do in the group and things that have made it unique? We'll definitely kick off this response with elimination polls, for sure. First of all, the whole universe that was created, that's all completely unique. And that expands and changes and evolves constantly. Like we just did an episode that hasn't released yet where we talked about, what did we just add? We had a groundskeeper for the crew. What was we had an arboretum. We now have an arboretum on our campus.
Arboretum, yep.
So there's constantly things. Our campus is constantly growing. We have a sports complex, including an auditorium. But elimination polls, which was the creation of Paul Chomo from Farman's Podcasts, polls is a huge part of what we do in the group. So if there's anything to be debated, and just to explain that, during one of these polls, I was having a Facebook or a text exchange with Paul, and we realized how serious of a conversation we were having over this thing we were discussing via text. And he put in a response back to me, "We're having a very serious conversation about the dumbest thing ever."
Right.
And I was like, wait a second.
Tagline.
And that instantly in that conversation became the whole backbone for the entire group. We're like, that's what we're doing. Yeah. Some people have said this is the Seinfeld of podcasters, or Seinfeld of podcast groups. And I think that kind of nails it. It's kind of a blend between the TV show The Office and Seinfeld. We're in an office environment where that's the world we've created, but it's kind of all about nothing, and we're very serious about our nothing.
Well, and I think that the polls started off fairly innocuously, like most polls do, just a kind of a general question, and one of them blew up. And then you and I got into it on the show about it.
Do you remember which one it was?
It was...
was it the potato poll?
A win occurs when you're on the majority side.
Well, there was ones early on about... It was stupid stuff like bar soap versus body wash or something stupid like that.
They used to be like just one thing versus another.
Yeah.
And then Paul decided to make the elimination version.
That's correct.
Right.
And people threatened to leave the group over choices of soups.
The thing was that in the spirit of engagement, like people began to answer very passionately about things like their favorite soup or what's better and the potato and what form is best.
Well, so the way that an elimination poll works is that he does a preliminary poll so you can nominate what's going to be included, because an elimination poll is only the top 14 because he runs it for 14 days straight.
Right.
And then whoever makes the top 14, and then it's an elimination poll. So you vote for your least favorite, and then it's kind of last man standing.
But people don't do that.
No matter how many elimination polls we've done.
Well, so here's one more thing that reminds me of is the members in our group. First of all, there is an age range. We're probably mostly somewhere in the early 30s to early 50s, with some outliers.
Early hundreds, like Jim.
Right, with some outliers. But generally, we're middle-aged adults.
Yeah.
Most of them are highly educated. Many of them are in professional fields.
Right.
We have actual members of NASA. We have another member in Australia that is a rocket scientist.
Yeah, we don't have a group of slouches. That's
we have architects. It's a bunch of professionals, really smart, funny, creative people.
And yet I'm the MVP.
But the point is that these are grown adults that operate in professional fields that are highly educated, very smart.
Right. So to devolve into a poll that will infuriate you,
right? So we have elimination polls where we've argued about potatoes and cereal and
desserts
and superhero characters and TV shows, but people argue from a very intellectual perspective because they're very smart.
It's very true. It's very true. And I find that people are very passionate about that. And then at the end of it, you're like, nobody wins, and yet we'll do the next poll.
Yeah. So everyone goes at each other's throats. It gets really strategic and tries to make their favorite option win
with kindness. Somehow this has maintained a kindness.
And then at the end, everybody's fine.
Yeah.
Like they might be really upset about the result, but everybody's not mad at each other.
Right, because it's a poll and it's ridiculous. So you can have an impassioned point of view.
I think that just speaks to that's the culture of the group. Like we all know that we're going to be serious, but not really serious.
Right.
I mean, the potato poll got its own episode with people writing letters back from the front lines of the Great Potato War.
Yes. For those listening at the Shanghai Podfest, if you just listen to the one about the potato wars, that's a perfect example. That's a great episode. That's a snapshot of how the group works, that one episode.
Something happens in the group, and then it gets brought to the show.
Well, those are all the questions, but there's any other, besides elimination polls, is there any other, we've talked a lot about it, but any other fun things or unique things about the group that kind of make it tick?
Well, I think the real crux is the whole intern philosophy and world.
Yeah.
And the polls are kind of what it's an easy win for constant engagement. And those two things, I think, really drive everything else that goes on in the group.
Well, I think human nature is people just like voting on things.
Agreed.
And so that's,
people have done Facebook Lives.
Yeah.
Every now and then of doing like weird stuff, like shaving their mustache. Clay did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had us vote on how to shave his mustache.
Yeah.
And then went through with, what did he give himself? The Colonel Mustard?
No.
I think it wasn't?
It was what's the mustard?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it's the one that goes down and then up like that. Yeah, and that was a poll that people voted, and then
That's
he
right.
backed it
And
up
then
by
he did it
doing.
right.
He Facebook Lived himself shaving from a full beard down to that.
Yeah, that was Clay Groves from the Fish Nerds podcast. He was busy with a lot of his own stuff, but he's nice enough to do a lot of fun stuff in our group. But we've done a lot with Facebook Live. We've done eating challenges. You made a bologna and mayonnaise or cream cheese cake or something.
Yeah, it was a bologna
I
cake.
forgot about that.
It was a bologna cake that I made.
And Casey Jones has fulfilled an eating challenge. There's been a couple others. So we've done those. So I think a lot of things like that.
I cooked some fiddleheads that Clay Groves sent me.
Yeah, so he went foraging for fiddleheads, sent them to you in Florida.
Yep.
And you cooked them per his instructions
That's right.
and ate them on air on Facebook
That's right.
Live.
That's
Yeah.
right. So I mean,
there's
and that's not the only thing. Like when I was with Keith, we did a Facebook Live of our time together. I mean, like the group has insane engagement that people just subscribe to. That this is going to be fun, and everyone supports one another. So it's like, oh man, I'm really glad to see you. Glad to hear how you're doing. Glad to see you doing this fun thing. So
I recently went on vacation. I called in from Jamaica because I was like, this is gonna be fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Road
That's
trip,
true.
Road trip audio diaries.
Yep. I mean, a whole other realm of possibility.
So there's a lot of there's some good examples. Well, we don't want to take too much more time, so that's kind of it. I hope that kind of gives a good explanation of kind of what we've done and how we've gotten the engagement we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So great. Well, thank you to Podbean and thank you to Shannon Martin. Hope everybody's enjoying Shanghai Podfest, and that's it. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Later.
Thanks for joining us for Podcasting Smarter. You can check our show notes at podcast.podbean.com for links and details. Please like our podcast, leave your comments, and help us spread the word to other podcasters so we can bring you more great episodes with podcasting tips and inspiration from fellow podcasters. If you want to connect with other podcasters or get interviewed on this podcast, please join our Podcasting Smarter Facebook group. We look forward to welcoming you to the community. Happy podcasting!